Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get started and welcome you all to our third annual The Whole Story, a Decolonial Cross-Cultural Day Institute. I'm Rebecca Mauser, and I'm an associate professor here at Missouri Southern State University in the Department of English and Philosophy. And I and my co-chairs, Dr. Megan Bever from History and Dr. Jensi Sundararajan from Physics would really like to welcome you. We're happy that so many of you could attend. This started a couple of years ago as a conversation between me and a colleague, Dr. Jen Ferguson, who's a creative writer and is now at Loyola out in LA. We wanted to think about how to embrace more diversity and inclusion in literary studies and presenting about literary topics. And it was important to me at the time, especially because as a medievalist, it's not a topic I have really had a lot of chance to think about, because of course, when you study the white Middle Ages, that's kind of what happens. But my field was talking intensely at the time about the use of the term Anglo-Saxon and its racist beginnings potentially. And so I thought we really needed these kinds of dialogues at the university level. And so the conference was developed to facilitate these discussions about systemic discrimination at the university level and open a dialogue for awareness and hopefully for change. And so to begin on that note, I first would like to acknowledge that MSSU occupies land that belong to the Osage Nation. And they have supplied a land acknowledgement statement that I would like to share. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional ancestral lands of the Osage Nation. The process of knowing and acknowledging the land we stand on is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for the ancestral Osage people who were on this land before us. And so even though we are in a virtual space, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge that. And before we move into our plenary and the introduction of our plenary speaker, I do want to let you know that we're thinking for Q&A after Dr. Okonkwo finishes his talk for today. We'd like to use the reaction buttons for you guys to raise your hand. And that way we can call on you in the order that we see them pop up. If you don't wish to speak your question aloud, we can also use the chat function, and both Chris and I can kind of keep track of that as well. After the plenary, we'll have a short break, and in between the breakout sessions, we'll also have breaks. And so the breakout sessions should pop up on your bottom toolbar as soon as we finish the plenary. And Kyle has been nice enough to say he's going to label the rooms with the speaker and topic for that room. If you have any difficulties transferring to a room, please do let us know. And I think that should cover all of the kind of technical issues. So unless anyone has any questions. Perfect. So we're a little early, and my introduction is short because I know that we're here to really see Dr. Okonkwo's talk, but it's a privilege and a pleasure to introduce today's plenary speaker, Dr. Christopher Okonkwo, who is currently an associate professor of English at the University of Missouri in Columbia, has generously accepted our invitation for today. He is a comparatist whose research, scholarship, and teaching address the intersecting histories, cultures, and literary productions of Anglophone Africa and the African diaspora, particularly fiction and nonfiction produced during the 20th and the 21st centuries. His research on classic and neo-slave narratives and their contemporary permutations and circulations, I think probably will inform his talk for today a bit, judging from the title. And recent publications have appeared in both college literature and researching African literatures. His forthcoming book, Kindred Spirits, Chinua Achebe and Toni Morrison is due out this spring from the University of Virginia Press. And I'm really excited to be working with Chris again. I remember him as a generous professor and a dynamic speaker from my time as a graduate student at Mizzou. I wish I could have taken some of his courses. And I'm really glad that he has accepted our invitation today, and his talk is titled, "This is not a story to pass on, the attack on Toni Morrison's beloved and the power of decolonial multi-perspectival narrative." Thank you so much, Chris. The floor is yours. Everyone, please welcome Christopher Okonkwo.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr. Miles. Let me pull up, if I can. Okay, can you see my slides? All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and wherever you are logging in from, or however you're logging in from. Thank you, Dr. Mauser, for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank Dr. Mauser and her co-chair, Dr. Bever, for extending me this invitation to give the plenary address. I also want to recognize Dr. Watson and Dr. Sundarajan and our IT support, Mr. Kyle Van. It is indeed a privilege and an honor for me to participate in this important conference, a conference at whose heart are critical issues of diversity, inclusion, and difficult dialogues in higher education. A conference initiated 2 years ago by Dr. Mauser and Dr. Jane Ferguson of Loyola Marymount University, that this project may have begun with a focus on English majors and minors, but has now been expanded to include all the departments at the university, illustrates its significance and future promises. You couldn't have chosen a better name than The Whole Story, a decolonial cross-cultural day institute for this endeavor. I feel at home, not just with the project's objectives, but with your great university, which identifies with the big cats. As you may know, here at Mizzou, we are the Missouri Tigers. There at MOSO, you go by the Lions. Go Lions. Lion is also the nickname of my alma mater, the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Back in those days, especially during tense national moments, when we, young students, young people, gathered at the university's speaker circle to protest deplorable campus housing conditions, hikes in tuition, police mistreatment of students and members of the community, or other pressing social justice issues, the student body president will mount a podium and hail us 3 times, "Great lions and lionesses." And we would, with one voice, unafraid, answer him, "Yes." My connections to you are even deeper than our cat roar. 2 of your esteemed faculty, Dr. Watson and Dr. Mauser, are Mizzou graduates and also graduates of my department. So you can say I am your brother from another mother. However, as intelligent, powerful, and universally respected as they can be, even lions, tigers, or lionesses sometimes find themselves at a crossroads. They find themselves unsure yet about how to tackle certain disturbing trends like poaching or localized existential threats such as regional droughts, wildfires, floods, deforestation, or other ecological and man-made disasters that also trouble and traumatize even the animal world. All that is my way of saying that when I accepted to give this plenary address, I was for a moment a little unsure and apprehensive, because I know the political context, subtext, and discursive expectations of the phrase, "the whole story." My uncertainty and uneasiness stemmed from picking up that live wire in this our present very fraught national moment. We find ourselves confronting not just a devastating COVID-19 pandemic, but with more gasoline poured into their flames during the past administration, and as another midterm election draws near, the culture wars are back. The culture wars are again reinvigorated, dog-whistled, pandered, and potently weaponized. My hesitation and concern deal also with the fact that many people in our line of work, particularly faculty and scholars of color and women, who like me research, teach, and write about race and about the fluid intertwining of race, gender, sexual orientation, class, religion, identity, and history, are in danger across the country. I was apprehensive also because of the minefields of conservative legislative initiatives and Republican council culture strategically laid across many parts of the nation relative to what we can teach or say to our students. Just last week, in his January 19, 2022 article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Jack Stripling makes the following observation about this moment, especially the entrapment of higher education by ideologies and sensitivities propagated by the ex-president Donald Trump. Quote, "A slew of bills in state legislatures seek to ban the teaching of, quote, divisive concepts on matters of race. Idaho lawmakers angered over social justice programs at Boise State University recently cut its budget by 1.5 million as a penance. Last summer, a controversy erupted over whether Nicole Hannah-Jones, lead author of the 1619 Project, one of Trump's favorite political targets, was worthy of tenure at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In Florida, conservative university board members and Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican who is widely viewed as Trump's kindred spirits, if not his rival, have made plain that public university presidents have no power to mandate masks or COVID-19 vaccinations, even as the university's own medical experts urge them to do so, end quote. I thought the world was finally coming to an end when a few years ago, my students, and part of your students too, started itemizing their resume bylines under their email sign-offs. But I never thought in my wildest dream that I would see what is today happening, particularly in the state of Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis. His bill, SB 148, captioned, "Stop the wrongs to our kids and employees, Stop Woke Act," aims not only to police education and its practitioners, but to protect whites, to relieve them of some of the discomfort around matters of race. According to the bill, quote, "A person on the basis of his race or gender does not take responsibility for actions done in the past by other members of the same caste or gender. Discomfort, guilt, pain, or any other kind of psychological distress should not be experienced," end quote. Can anything be more harmful to education and more insulting and stigmatizing to the students? Many administrators and instructors at the nation's high schools and colleges today fear for their lives and careers. In some cases, some of them, without the protection of tenure, the union, the courts, or even their communities, have lost their jobs for speaking truth to power, for trying to teach and tell the whole story. At a time when determined hackers and troublemakers have infiltrated even secure Zoom classes, meetings, and events, one wonders if this plenary address, this whole conference today, is not being monitored. That is not paranoia. That is the time we live in. You can begin to see the causes of my initial uneasiness. but most of all, why I believe this conference that is focused on the often excluded voices and subjects is so important, daring, and necessary. And so I want to thank you again and tell you how pleased I am to be with you today. I hope that we could have some conversation at the end of my talk for a little Q&A. I'm also hoping to join you later during the breakout sessions. The title of my talk today is "This is not a story to pass on: The attack on Toni Morrison's beloved and the power of decolonial multi-perspectival narration." I know our attention these past several months has rightly been focused on more pressing issues of the pandemic. However, I would be proceeding with my remarks, hoping that some of us in the audience are familiar with the context of my topic. For those who are not, the backstory is the drama last year in the state of Virginia, whose then Republican gubernatorial candidate, Glenn Youngkin, energized by ordinary Virginia residents and anti-critical race theory Republican political actors, proposed to ban Beloved. As a high school senior, one of those political actors named Blake Murphy, who is now an associate general counsel for the National Republican Congressional Committee, told his mother that Beloved, which he was assigned to read in high school AP class, gave him, quote, night terrors. He called the novel, quote, disgusting and gross. The 2013 campaign that Blake's mother waged against Beloved after this AP incident found its way into Virginia's gubernatorial election, with the then candidate and now Governor Youngkin joining voices that proposed to ban the novel. Beloved, a story about slavery, rape, and sexual trauma, is targeted for cultural and curricular cancellation because, you guessed it, it deals with slavery, sexual violence, and psychological distress, all of which are indisputable truths of American history. That, in a nutshell, is the backdrop. I am also proceeding with my talk, hoping that some, if not many of us in the audience, know or have heard about Toni Morrison, or have read her work, or Beloved more specifically, or watched Oprah Winfrey's movie adaptation of the book, or at least are familiar with the story's historical context, which is the story of Kentucky slave and mother, Margaret Garner, who murdered one of her children instead of surrendering her to slavery. For those who haven't read Beloved, however, my title statement is one of the novel's most memorable and lyrical last lines, rendered 3 times in both past tense and present iterations. It was not a story to pass on. It was not a story to pass on. This is not a story to pass on. If you would be so kind as to indulge me, I would like to get to the core of my reflections about what the attack on Beloved says about the power of stories, storytelling, and most especially multi-perspectival narratives in somewhat roundabout way befitting a Toni Morrison plot. My reason for wanting to digress some and then zigzag my way back to Morrison is simple. Even as important a writer and intellectual as Morrison is, and even though the attack on her novel is of interest to me, the issues at stake, I believe the decolonial issues at stake are much bigger and deeper than Toni Morrison or any one author and their work. As such, I want to attempt to frame the issues within much broader intersecting colonization and slavery experiences of Africans, African Americans, and United States indigenous peoples about whom Morrison has written directly and indirectly, particularly in her 2 other novels, A Mercy, 2008, and Paradise, 1998. Morrison's cross-cultural consciousness, her authorial and thematic investments in the stories of Black America and Native Americans are hardly surprising or without context. Like many African Americans, specifically, Toni Morrison too has Native American blood in her maternal line. Some observers of the BIPOC project remind us to be mindful of conflating and erasing certain group particularities in the urgent effort at multi-experiential solidarity. That makes sense. What no one disputes, however, is the centuries-long impact of racism, imperialism, violence, violent land robbery, and white supremacy on Black and brown people whose complete stories, struggles, and triumphs the BIPOC umbrella and project seek to highlight and empower. So here goes. As you probably already know, I am African. I was born in Nigeria, and I am Igbo. Or as one of my children reminded me recently when I was tying together our blue American passports and our green Nigerian passports, quote, "Daddy, we are Igbo, but we are also Nigerian, Igbo American, Nigerian American, and African American. You said so yourself." When I wondered if all of that wasn't confusing, this child of mine, then a 5th grader, went full-run DeSantis and NFL countdown on me. "Nope," she says, emphatically. "I don't want to hurt your feelings, Daddy, but you've been mossed." Can you imagine? I've been mossed. Anyway, my first name is Christopher. I also have a middle name, an Igbo name, Ndubuisi, which translates to life is first, or life is paramount, or life is supreme. Both names were given to me at baptism. After decades of British colonial rule, my homeland, Nigeria, became independent in 1960. And living at a time of pervasive Eurocentrism, when they were told and taught that colonization rescued them from their savagery and into civilization, that the white man's and the white world's ways were better and superior, it was no surprise many Igbo parents of my parents' time ensured that their children's first names were English and Christian, or what they thought were English and Christian. But that is not all. When I was in primary school, one of my older cousins used to hold me down and tickle me. As I conversed with laughter, he would help me in a sing-song manner, "Christopher Columbus, Christopher Columbus, Christopher Columbus." He would say, "Christopher Columbus, the man who discovered America. Did you know you discovered America, eh? Did you? Be proud." As I tried to wiggle out of the tickle, he would remind me that I owned the whole of America, the land and everything in it, because, as he said he was told, to the victor go the spoils. It was later in my life, several years before I stepped foot on American soil, that I learned that the story of my discovering and owning America was a bold-faced lie. I did no such thing, and neither did the patron saint of travelers whose name I bear, nor the Italian explorer whose exploits and infamy I was enjoyed to celebrate. Looking back on it again now, it is clear to me that, unbeknownst to him, my adoring older cousin, who unfortunately had only attended high school in the village, but was at the time living with us in the city, was a victim of that condition that the revered historian Carter G. Woodson would call the miseducation of the Negro. The ultimate agenda of colonization was territorial domination and natural resource expropriation, as Frantz Fanon reminds us. Colonial pedagogy, in short, empire, no matter the European country, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, and no matter the hemisphere or the colonized land, its version of history is notorious for its brainwashing and its distortions, gaps, and falsehoods. About the subjugated, consider this. For example, the continent of Africa, which is sometimes miscalled a country, has three big seas, the rivers Nile, Congo, and Niger. And if it is true that human beings started in Africa and that the continent has been occupied for thousands of years, so why will I be told and taught as a child that the Scottish explorer Mungo Park discovered the River Niger, a 2,600-mile long river that empties into the Atlantic Ocean in Nigeria's delta and was widely known to the various African peoples who inhabit Africa, who inhabit the area of its majestic paths? Why were the indigenous peoples of the area, now known as South Africa, told by the invading Europeans that they couldn't claim the land as theirs? Well, because nobody was really there in the southernmost regions when they landed. Why would the minority white settlers in Zimbabwe claim and forcefully seize most of the country's best land, its best real estate, while consigning the native Zimbabweans to some of the poorest farmlands, and the white descendants of the land robbers complain and sue when the late Zimbabwean president, Robert Mugabe, decided to rectify that racial and historical travesty by redistributing back to the people the land that was stolen from them since 1898. Like Morrison, I am Catholic and have been all my life. I remember how Easter plays staged in open ground at our local parish when I was a child decked the white-faced Jesus character in straightened artificial blonde hair and flowing white costume. And Satan, the devil, the tempter, was figured as a Black person. Not only was the menacing devil outfitted in deep Black costume, but also the devil had two horns. We, the participant audience, were mesmerized. We clapped and cheered for the white Jesus and despised the Black, ugly, and menacing devil. As a child, I was discomforted, distressed, pained, and haunted by those images. I had no words then to articulate the psychological scarring those figurations and representations did to my racial and gendered self-recognition as a Black African child that was expected to grow in this Black African man. And I find myself looking for a word to describe this. As I look back on it now, my cousin was unknowingly helping Empire to do some of his dirty job. He was assisting Empire in the perpetuation of a false narrative, or at best, an incomplete origin and settler story about the United States relative to its indigenous peoples. Anyone that reads award-winning scholar Roxanne Dunbar-Otise's two eye-opening books, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, 2014, and Not a Land of Immigrants, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and a History of Erasure and Exclusion, 2021, would be quite surprised by how deep the problem of distortions, gaps, and falsification is. Simply by reorienting the gaze, the compass of history, and looking at the story of the United States from a different angle, that of the country's dispossessed, silenced, and often stereotyped indigenous people, a completely different picture, or at least a more complicated, complete, balancing image emerges, an image in which the native people and not the settler colonists are at the center. Like Dunbar-Otise, Toni Morrison fully appreciates the power of narration, of restoring. As Morrison powerfully narrates in her novels A Mercy and Paradise, the blood and historical ties between African Americans and Native Americans are so significant that the story of one cannot be fully told without the other. According to Morrison's scholar Maxine Lavon Montgomery, the novel A Mercy is key to understanding most of the concerns and tropes in Morrison's fictional universe. As Montgomery writes, the novel contains in miniature forms several of the subjects, character dynamics, symbolisms, and historical determinants that she developed in the 8 novels that came before A Mercy. Of note also is that A Mercy is polyphonic. It is told from an enriching array of perspectives that include and shift between omniscient, first person, and interior monologue. In setting the story in the late 1600s, a time before what we now know as the United States took its shape, and when the assortment of people that came here forcibly or voluntarily were still sorting themselves out, Morrison underscores the indispensability of the Native American woman, Lena, both to the survival of the invading European master Jacob and his wife, Mistress Rebecca. Lena also becomes initially a big sister and later a surrogate mother to the African girl, Florence, when she is taken in by the Dutch slave trader Jacob Vaak as payment for a defaulted loan by one Senghor Ortega, who owned both Florence and her mother. Both women, Lena and Florence, African and Native American, forge a tight cross-cultural bond, a sisterly solidarity that helps them triumph over numerous adversities. Although Florence's mother does not literally mother, kill her as Sete does with Beloved, her action of surrendering Florence to the enslaver is technically infanticidal. But she sees her decision as a benevolent act, a kind of providential intervention, an act of mercy. As we learn at the story's ending, she gave Florence away to hopefully save her from the ravages of slavery and rampant sexual violence and degradation of slaves. We learn that Florence and her brother were conceived through rape by enslavers. We also learn, among other things, that Africans were ironically both enslavers and slaves, victims and victimizers at the same time, and that through the magic and power of literacy, the girl of Florence writes her own slave autobiography. From her perspective, gaining voice and agency in the process, but also allowing Morrison to tell us in retrospect what the life of Sete's murdered baby Beloved possibly could have been had she lived. Although gone in heaven, the murdered character Beloved survives in Florence on this earth. I have this strong feeling that Toni Morrison is cracking up. She must be laughing so hard in heaven at those who attacked and want to ban her beloved. Morrison and the host of angels in heaven are rolling on the floor because trying to ban her book is the dumbest thing the Virginia politicians ever did. Didn't somebody ever tell them that if you censor something or banish it, you increase its value and curiosity about it? Morrison is like, that don't scare me. I'm used to it. Her 1970 debut novel, The Bluest Eye, is in the good company of America's consistently challenged and banned books. The reason? That The Bluest Eye depicts explicit sexual violence, they say. Can you guess why else Toni Morrison is laughing so hard? Because she gave everybody plenty of warning in Beloved. She warned us in those timeless words uttered to the pregnant and physically exhausted Sethe by the fugitive white girl, Emmy Denver, who's on her way to Boston. Anything dead coming back to life hurts. Some time ago, the eminent Kenyan novelist and intellectual and one of the most respected Black authors, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, published a compilation of his lectures titled Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Language in African Literature. In this book, Ngugi reminds us that language is a site of struggle, of liberation and decolonization. He argues that if one of the most devastating weapons of colonization is language, wherein colonizers systematically and systemically mess up the cultural realities and worldviews of colonized people by displacing or attempting to replace their native languages with dominant foreign tongues, such as Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, and English. So also must language be a tool that the colonized can use to fight back, to wage a multidimensional war against persistent subjugation, to regain and reshape their identities, and as the late Nigerian author Chinua Achebe once said, to restore dignity and pride to themselves and to the civilizations they themselves built. Because as much as it may delude itself, Europe, with Greece at its center, did not invent civilization and share it with the rest of the world. That, too, is a bold-faced lie. The master's tool, his tools of physical and mental enslavement and colonization may not be able to completely destroy the master's house, as we say. But like James Baldwin, Achebe, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Morris knows how powerful language can be, which is why she talked about language in her Nobel Prize address. We're almost out of time, and I have to get to the ending of it real fast. For Toni Morrison, though, the very idea of woke culture is a misnomer because Black people have been waking up and trying to arouse themselves from all the degradations. I was going to play a minute of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, but time doesn't permit us, and I will just end it right there, hoping that the point has been well made. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. And we welcome any kind of discussion and questions at this time. So we have plenty of time for that.
Do we have some more time? Did I misread my time?
We have until 1:05, so it's about 15 to 20 minutes. Did you want to show the clip?
Yes, I thought I was. Yeah. Thanks so very much.
Sure.
Just a minute. So I was saying something about James Baldwin and Chinua Achebe and Toni Morrison and how they know how powerful language is. And for Toni Morrison, language is so powerful. She talks about it in her Nobel speech. But Ron DeSantis was trying to be cute and sarcastic when he named his bill the Woke Act. Morrison warned him to, but he wouldn't listen. She warned him and all the legislatures that repressed or are moving ahead with the plans to repress beloved, that anything dead coming back to life hurts. Anything asleep that wakes up, any brutalized or suppressed slavery story that arises from slumber, woke up. Any suppressed story or any other thing that wakes up is gonna hurt. And it cannot keep quiet. It insists on remembrance. Like a prophet, Toni Morrison foresaw the attack on Beloved and the attack on critical race theory. Although the omniscient and first-person narrations will remain popular, there is something about polyphonic narratives that allow us to see things from multiple sides. My argument is that those who are trying to ban critical race theory and Beloved are secretly afraid of the power of seeing things from a different side. Caught in that terror and looking for a scapegoat, the attackers of Beloved are unaware that the point of multi-perspectival decolonial narrative is not racial retaliation. In other words, to depict the enslaved and the colonized, the excluded and the marginal, the Black and the brown people long victimized by white supremacy, to portray them as, you guess it, angels and saints, but rather to tell their stories in a more humane and complex ways. In much of mainstream American literature and in antebellum slave autobiographies, the slave, particularly the enslaved woman and mother, had little to no interior life and thought. Morrison set out to change that in the Sethe story. As Gil Scott Heron writes in that song, this revolution will not be televised because the awakening, the woke act, first occurs in Sethe's mind and in the mind of the oppressed. In his classic work, The Wretched of the Earth, the great Martinican psychiatrist Frantz Fanon reminds us, he cautions us, that the relationship of the oppressor and the oppressed, the colonizer and the colonizer, is one of perpetual adversarial relationship. The two, the master and the slave, the colonizer and the colonized, the oppressor and the oppressor, the center and the margin, are caught in a seemingly endless cycle of mutual suspicion, envy, and hatred. Morrison's works try to advance all of that. As the numerous accounts of native insurrection and slave rebellion illustrate, perhaps one of the worst mistakes, indeed one of the egregious tactical blunders committed by many slave traders, slave owners, was to sleep with both their eyes shut. They forget that even the most servile servant is not happy about his or her situation. The oppressor is never free until he frees the oppressed or is compelled to do so. Dr. King talked about the interconnectedness of our lives, but he also warned his clergymen that time was running out and he could not wait. Why could he not wait? Because of the woke act. His long downtrodden people just woke up and saw the hypocrisies of gradualism. It was because of that decolonial awakening that the enslaved Africans and their descendants in Santo Domingo fought their French colonizers in what is now called Haiti. It was the awakening to the injustices and land ambitions of British colonization that led to the bloody Pontiac Rebellion of 1763, when a coalition of indigenous people attacked British installations and settlements in hopes of expelling the colonists. It was after they woke up that Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs plotted and escaped. It was in a state of complete wakefulness that W.E.B. Du Bois published his enduring decolonial works, The Souls of Black Folk and the Negro and the Black Reconstruction in America. There is no way Paul Laurence Dunbar could have penned his poem, We Wear the Mask, if he wasn't awake. It was after he woke up that Malcolm X dropped Little as his surname in favor of X. It was also because of the Great Awakening, because of the dead things coming back to life, that the R&B singer Lauryn Hill titled her 1998 debut solo album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. We find that great awakening in the politically charged movement and music of Rastafari. We see it in reggae icon Bob Marley's timeless album, Exodus. It is there in the works of Kendrick Lamar and Nas. It is there in Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going On? Woke is at the heart of Afrobeat giant Fela's subversive songs, and we spot it in Tupac Shakur's song, Keep Your Head Up. It is that great awakening, coupled with the violence and death inflicted routinely on Black people, Black children in the South, that prompted Nina Simone to cry out, Mississippi, goddamn, and energized the Black Lives Matter movement and led to this moment. One could go on, but I will let Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie maybe speak for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a question. Usually takes a minute to pull up. Hopefully I'll play 5 minutes of it. We do still have some time, correct?
Yes, that should be fine.
If we are over, then I'll let Adichie just speak for a minute.
No, I think we still have 15 minutes and then we have a
Okay.
10-minute break. So.
I'll just play 5 minutes of it.
Okay.
I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in Eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read. I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Lai, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity.
In the interest of time, I would pause it here, but it's on YouTube. It's been viewed close to 9 million times around the world. So, but thanks so much for listening. My apologies for that time, mixed up. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And no apologies necessary. And we still have plenty of time if anyone has questions.
Yes, Dr. Dennis, please.
Actually, I was just, it was a clap.
Oh.
I don't have a question per se. I just really enjoyed your presentation today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, please. Natania and then Jody.
Yes. Hi. So I have a question. I am a high school English teacher, and I work in a very conservative school district. But one of my goals is to bring out this conversation in my students, and to make my classroom as inclusive as possible. So we're reading Othello right now, and I'm struggling to balance trying to point out, like, this is the treatment of Othello versus then and now, and the parallels, without, crossing the boundary of, I don't have tenure and I can't, push the envelope too much. So for someone in sort of my shoes who's trying to start kids thinking about this, but doesn't necessarily have the ability to have the full conversation, where would you suggest I start?
That's a very good question. And the Othello situation has also preoccupied Toni Morrison. In fact, she did a musical in which she tried to rewrite, the Othello story. Denzel Washington, has also acted in it. My suggestion would be to break the subject down to the human dimensions, right? Avoiding, the more difficult things that might get you in trouble. But to explain, there are issues that are so, even when they are racialized, they are still very universal. If you explain them to children, they will get it. And the rest of it, the children will have to find out as they get older. But for now is to look at the story. What are the things that are very human there? You tread carefully. You tread carefully between being so specific about the racial dynamics of Othello and what they are trying to do with stopping teachers from getting seriously into race. But my suggestion would be to go human first and then racialize. Children will get it. Children are very smart, because my concern is they were very condescending to children. The assumption that children, are so fragile, so weak, that they will be so permanently, damaged, when certain stories are told to them. So that would be my suggestion. I hope it helps. Jody, please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your discussion. It's very engaging. One of the things that I was wondering about is a couple of the slides, particularly the 7th one, where we have one of the more contemporary images. I have come across it, but I was wondering if you could speak to that particular. It's actually the one with the whitewashed artwork.
Oh, this one.
Yes, yeah. I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit upon I just want to know your thoughts on it, I think.
Well, my thoughts have been laid out in the talk, really, which is, the attempt. This painting came out a couple of weeks ago or so, and, went viral. Yep. The way a piece of painting captures, what the attempt is to erase history. My concern, as I said, is as you try to erase something, you actually erase their value. I don't know if politicians, if anybody is talking to them, folks who are aggrieved, I don't know if they have like grandma or grandpa, calling them after dinner saying, "What are you doing?" This has happened historically. If you try to erase something, in literature, we call it palimpsest, right? The attempt to paint over stuff, and it's very difficult to do so. So I think it's a futile effort, for those who are saying, ban critical race theory. Critical race theory is not going anywhere. It will come back in other permutations. But my concern is if we try to erase a certain perception, of history, then who is actually getting shortchanged? It is the people who are denied that information, So, my thoughts about, the painting, it's a fabulous painting. I wish I could buy one. It's in reprints now. And Toni Morrison truly would be laughing. I think she would be laughing because, there is no way you can, cover up something that big in history. So that's my thought. That's my thought on it. I hope I hope it answers your question in any way.
It does. Thank you. I did come across this particular painting. And so I also think that your perspective on that she's laughing is very heartening to hear, because it's easy, at least from my point of view, to get very, I don't even know what the right word is, but just disheartened, I guess, disheartened. So I think I might be bringing that image of her laughing forward with me. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks so much.
And I think we have time for one more question if anybody has a question.
By the way, I can go back to that painting, and if you caught my NFL stuff right there, I don't know. I watch too much TV. I don't even know why they kept my job over here, but it's okay. You know, we're ready for you all. That's speaking as a true Kansas Chiefs fan. I'm sorry.
If there are no other questions, then I would like to thank you for your talk today. It was wonderful. And I know that we're expecting you a little later also in one of the breakout sessions. So hopefully everyone can attend. We have about 10 minutes before the breakout sessions will start. So you guys can feel free to get coffee or whatever it is at home that you need to do. And thank you so much so far for a wonderful, and hopefully we can thank Dr. Okonkwo for his talk. So,
well, thanks so much for having me, and you know, good luck with the rest of the program. I'll join in at 4 o'clock, the breakout session. Thank you, everybody.
thank you.